University. A recent article in the New York Times, a columnist named David Brooks. Some of you may know David Brooks. He is from a political perspective, probably more to the left, more of a liberal point of view in his writings. And he wrote a very, very interesting article, really citing other sources back in May of this year. He said, and some of this is quotes, some of this is just the bullet points. I have the whole article with all its verification right there. So you want to grab a copy of that after church, you can do that, and all the sources and everything are right in that. I'm not going to just bullet point this because of time, but Google released a database of 5.2 million books published between the year 1500 and 2008. In this database, you can type a search word into the database and find out how frequently different words were used through different periods of time. It's pretty intriguing. You think about it. Every book since 1500, and you can see how words were used and even how words shifted in usage during that time. Now, between 1960 and 2008, these folks that use the study, they call them individualistic words and phrases increasingly overshadowed communal words and phrases. For instance, 48 years, phrases like personalize, self, stand out, unique, I come first, I can do it myself, were used more frequently than words that used to be used: community, collective, tribe, share, united, band together, and common good. Those uses receded, while the first usage, they increased. The second element of the story is what they call demoralization. This is a non-Christian article, so you have to bear with the terminology somewhat. They found terms, moral terms like virtue, decency, and conscience was used, less frequently over the course of the 20th century. Words associated with moral excellence, honesty, patience, and compassion was used much less frequently. So virtue, decency, and conscience were used less in the last 48 years. Honesty, patience, and compassion was used much less. They identified 50 words associated with moral virtue. They found that 74% of these words were used less frequently this century than the previous century. Certain types of virtues were especially hard hit. Usage of courage words like bravery and fortitude fell by 66%. Usage of gratitude words like thankfulness and appreciation dropped by 49%. Usage of humility words like modesty and humbleness dropped by 52%. Usage of compassion words like kindness and helpfulness dropped by 56%. Meanwhile, usage of words associated with the ability to deliver, now we're talking about sort of industry and corporate America, with the ability to deliver, like discipline and dependability, rose over the century, as did the usage of the words associated with fairness. They point out these sorts of virtues are most relevant to economic production and exchange. So as we become more productive and more productive, I guess is the word, no other word to add to that, these words, discipline and dependability, rose. They concluded that one of the broadest studies with Google search engine, he found further evidence of two elements I mentioned on the subject of individualization. He found the word preferences was barely used until 1930. But usage since has surged. On the general level of demoralization, he finds a long decline in usage of terms like faith, wisdom, ought, evil, and prudence, and a sharp rise in what you might call social science terms like subjectivity, normative, psychology, and information. All in the last 48 years plus. So David Brooks concludes a lot of this data. He says, so the story I'd like to tell is this. Over the past half century, society has become more individualistic. Does this surprise anybody? As it's become more individualistic, it's also become less morally aware. Because social and moral fabrics are linked. They can't be separated. The atomization and demoralization of society have led to certain forms of social breakdown, which government has tried to address, sometimes successfully and sometimes not successfully. This story, if true, should cause discomfort for those on the right and for those on the left. Conservatives sometimes argue that if we could just reduce government to the size it was back in, say, the 1950s, America would be vibrant and free again. But the underlying sociology and moral culture to do that is just not there. And that's so true. Government could be smaller when the social fabric was more tightly knit. But small government will have different and more cataclysmic effects today when it is not. Liberals sometimes argue that our main problems come from the top. A self-dealing elite, and here's a word I've never heard until I read this article, of oligarchic bankers. Anyone hear that word, oligarchic? You've heard that word? Oh, you're a teacher or something. You're really smart. Yeah, I can tell you're really smart. I never knew that. But when I typed this out, I did this little spelling thing on the side, and I defined the word. So you know what it means? It means this, oligarchic. Remember, you heard it here first. What did you learn at church today? I learned oligarchic. Is that how you say it? Who said that? Oligarchic? Let's call it Oli. And because we make them up. We don't submit. I come from Plymouth, Mass. That's where English came to America, by the way. So we actually know how to say it. But some people say oligarchic, but it's oligarchic. And it means basically overpowering, over-controlling, like the puppet master. They're pulling the strings. Bankers. But the evidence suggests that individualism and demoralization are pervasive up and down society. In other words, you can't blame to any social strata. It may even be more pervasive at the bottom. Liberals will sometimes talk as if our problems are fundamentally economic and can be addressed politically through redistributing wealth. But maybe the root of the problem is also cultural. The social and moral trends swamp the proposed redistributive remedies. So you know what that article said? Encapsulating it from my worldview? We're not turning this ship around. This ship of American culture as we know it, and you can have a left-slanted liberal political view or a right-slanted political view. I don't care who gets elected into Congress or the presidency and who controls the Senate. We're not turning this ship around. The problem, my friends, is not in Washington. It's in the fabric of American people. Now, you can blame that for long-time standings in Washington or whatever, but I just blame it on good old-fashioned depravity, where we have a self-serving self. I don't care if you're right or left or somewhere in the middle. It's a self-serving self that has brought us down. It's the greed mentality that has brought our country down to where we're at. Now let me read you these verses. 2 Timothy 3, verse 1. But know this, that in the last days grievous times shall come. For men shall be lovers of self, lovers of money, boastful, haughty, railers, disobedient to parents, unthankful and unholy, without natural affection, implacable, slanderers, without self-control, fierce, no lovers of good, traitors, headstrong, puffed up, lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God, holding a form of godliness, but having denied the power thereof, from these turn away. See, I believe Christians make a tragic mistake, and we talk about this in some form or another on a regular basis, and it's having a small or a non-existent worldview. I think most of our worldview starts with the mirror in the morning. I look at that, I get up in the mirror and I look at myself, and okay, this is my world. And I look at that reflection, and that reflection has this need, and it has that need. And this reflection has this place of dissatisfaction, and this place of dissatisfaction. And that reflection wants this, or desires that. And this reflection feels really bad about itself, or wasn't brought up right, or feels neglected, or battles with loneliness, or whatever it is. And you look in that reflection, that's my worldview. That's what motivates me. That's where my world circles around, is what I see in that mirror. I don't go really much beyond that. So if I like what I see in that mirror, I'm sort of happy. Most of us don't like it. Because I'm not even talking, trust me, about the physical, even though that's relevant. I'm talking about, I don't like what happened to me when I was a child. I don't like my economic status. I don't like how I have to work. I don't like how my wife treats me and my husband treats me. I don't like the fact I have no security when I get older. Whatever, fill in the blank, I look, and that's my worldview. So what am I going to do today? I'm going to be dissatisfied. I'm going to be unhappy. I'm going to look otherwise. I'm going to be frustrating. I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to get negative inside my heart. I'm going to be dark in my mind and my emotions, because that's my worldview. That's driving me. That's my motivation. Fix me. Give me. Correct me. Fulfill me. And I go as far as my worldview. I get as engaged as my worldview. Is it any wonder these words have shifted in the last 48 years? 50 years? Paul, personal pain, desires dominate year after year, robs us of really the full expression of a New Testament life, which has been available to all of us since the cross. Romans chapter 1, verse 1, in American Standard Bible, Paul, a servant of Jesus Christ, called to be an apostle, separated unto the gospel of God. Look how he describes himself. Paul, I'm a servant of Jesus Christ. This is who I am. Paul, raised in a poor home. No, I'm a servant of Jesus Christ. I'm called to be an apostle. Now, I don't believe there's actual apostles today, but the office of apostle just means special messenger. That's all that it means. So a special messenger. I believe in one sense, every New Testament saint is an apostle. In one sense. Not like they were obviously in the New Testament, but in a sense we're all special messengers. And what's the message that's so special? It's the gospel of Jesus Christ. So in a sense, I'm an apostle. Now, I don't know what that means for you. Well, let me go on and finish. He says, separated unto the gospel of God. I'm set apart to the gospel of God. I'm an apostle of Jesus Christ, and I'm separated unto the gospel of God. And we know that this gospel of grace in Ephesians 3, verse 2, was given to him. So I have this gospel that I'm separated to. So I ask myself, where am I an apostle to? My neighborhood, my job, wherever your life goes. See, Paul's idea is wherever he goes, that's where he went. That's where his mission field is. Most of us will not be called to the mission field. Most of us will not be called to full-time ministry, maybe like what I do. But you have a world that I can't reach. You go places I can't go. You touch people I can never touch. So how does that work? See, Paul at this point had never been to Rome. He wanted to go. He ended up going, ended up dying there years later. But he had an understanding of the world. He was a Hebrew, but he's also a Roman citizen. He used them both to his advantage. He used the fact that he was a Hebrew, and he used the fact that he was a Roman citizen numerous times, if you read the book of Acts, to his advantage. And he lived in a culture that was dominated by the Greeks. So in Corinthians he says, to the Jew I become the Jew, to the Greek I become the Greek, that I may win some. So when I talk to a Jew, I'm going to talk to them how the gospel applies to a Jew. And when I talk to the Greek or the Gentiles, I'm going to tell them how the gospel applies to the Gentile. I won't change the gospel. I'll just change my approach depending on my audience. That's all. So I look at the Jew, I'm there, I have a goal for the Jew is to introduce them to the gospel. I have a goal for the Gentile to introduce them to the gospel. In fact, that's my goal for my life, is to introduce people to the gospel. His life was defined in verse 1 of Romans 1. He defines his worldview. Paul, a servant of Jesus Christ. Paul, called to be an apostle. Paul, separated unto the gospel of God. That's my starting point, he said. That's how I view my life. That's how I view the world. When I look into the mirror, I don't see Paul, the needy person. I see Paul, a servant of Jesus Christ. Paul, called to be an apostle. Paul, separated unto the gospel of God. That's what I see. That's my worldview. See, he was obviously a master missionary. Rome had this amazing thing. He knew that Rome was the center of the earth, and it was at that point. And Rome had something no one else had that to this day is still true. They had roads. That sounds like a little thing, but it wasn't. It's a big thing. They had these roads that still are in existence today. You can still walk on Roman roads today. And these roads, Paul saw, okay, if I can get the gospel to Rome, if I can get a church in Rome, if I can get the people in Rome training missionaries and discipling people and sending people out, boy, I can get to the whole world from Rome. Rome will be a linchpin, a launching pad for the gospel to reach the uttermost parts of the world. I'm trying to put you inside his mind. Because you go to 2 Corinthians chapter 11, he was beaten 3 times, shipwrecked 3 days and night, beaten with rods, forsaken, torn at by wild beasts, forsaken by all his close friends. Gave a resume of his human life. Wasn't what I would call a pleasant day-to-day existence for him. None of this stuff matters to me. From prison, he writes, hey, for me to live is what? Christ. And while I'm living, it's Christ. If I die, oh, that'd be finally, thank you. That's gain. That's gain. Death is gain. But for while I'm alive and while I'm breathing, my worldview says it's Christ. How do I get this gospel to more people? How do I win some? When he asked for prayer in Ephesians chapter 6 and he asked for prayer in Colossians chapter 4, he didn't ask for prayer from deliverance from prison. He was in prison. He never said, pray, get out of here. He said, pray that I can make known the mystery of the gospel. That's how I want you to pray for me. I know I'm in prison. Yeah, I'll just write letters while I'm here. But pray that I can make known the mystery of the gospel. That's what I want prayer for. You say, pray I get more money, pray I get a better husband, a different husband, new one. I don't care, just pray. No, pray that I make known the mystery of the gospel. Romans chapter 1, verse 13, skipping down. And I would have you not ignorant, brethren, that oftentimes I proposed to come to you and was hindered hitherto, that I might have some fruit in you also, even as the rest of the Gentiles. And here's the verse I want to focus on. I am a debtor because I'm in debt to the Greeks and the barbarians, to the wise and to the foolish. So as much as is in me, I am ready to preach the gospel to you also that are in Rome. For I am not ashamed of this gospel. For it is the power of God and the salvation to everyone that believes, to the Jew first and also the Greek. So now we're looking at his worldview, the drive. Because I'm a debtor. Who you're a debtor to, Paul? You're a debtor to the Greeks? No, I'm not indebted to them. Indebted to the Jews? No, I'm not indebted to them. Indebted to the Roman government? No, I'm not indebted to them. Then who are you indebted to? The gospel. I'm indebted to the gospel. The Jews, the Greeks, Rome, the othermost parts of the world, they're recipients of the gospel. But I'm indebted to this gospel. 1 Timothy 1:11 sort of brings this out. According to the glorious gospel of the blessed God, which was committed to my trust. In other words, there is no man, no nationality, no personal quality that captures Paul's heart of desires. He was just captured really by the gospel of Jesus Christ. He says, I have a gospel for Rome, and God has given it to me. He's committed it to me. I'm in debt to you if I don't give you this gospel. He crossed seas that were storm-tossed. He took beatings from men, false accusations, great personal hardship, and eventually death because of the debt that he saw himself under. Not a debt in the sense like he thought he had to pay God back, because that would be anti-grace. He was compelled. He was compelled that God had entrusted him with this. And because God gave him this gem, this precious, eternal message, he was indebted to give it back. It's been said, the world has given the church nothing, and God has given the church something for the world. To the rich, to the poor, to the weak, to the strong, to world leaders, to paupers, to children, to parents, to brothers and sisters, to our neighbors, to those far away, we are in debt. God himself has left us his gospel for them. There has been a treasure deposited in you. And there has been a treasure deposited in me. 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 8. This verse is talking about the controversy of the gift of tongues, but talks about a certain sound. A trumpet has a certain sound. And the idea was if the trumpeter made the wrong sound, the troops wouldn't know what to do. But I want to take this into the gospel. It's a certain sound of the gospel. When you preach the grace-based gospel, understanding it's God, grace plus nothing, that God lavishes his life through his Son, Jesus Christ, on the human race, for whosoever believes on him shall never perish but have everlasting life. That's the certain sound of the gospel, whatever that means. Say, okay, I get what you're saying, Pastor. I'm getting a little convicted here. My worldview's been mirrorized, but where do I go from here? I'm just a regular person. Well, that's all there are, by the way. There's regular people. Greeks, barbarians, Jews, doesn't matter. They're just regular people. I had a football coach in high school when I played football. And I was a tight end. I've told this story somewhat before. And I was a very small tight end. By the time they realized I was so small, they moved me as a split end. But at that point, I was a tight end, weighed about 130, 135 pounds, and I was supposed to block people. That's what tight ends do. They block people, and they catch passes every now and then. And so I had I remember this particular play, I was supposed to block the middle linebacker. And so the play develops, and I go block the middle linebacker, and he's not there. So I'm standing in the middle field, looking to block the middle linebacker. He was tackling the quarterback, my quarterback. And because somebody didn't block him. Anyway, so I'm there blocking. And so they call that play again, and I'm there to block the middle linebacker. Nowhere to be found. So I'm standing in the middle of the field again. So I come off the field, and the coach yells at me in a very gentle tone, and says, you know, what happened on that play? He goes, well, I couldn't find him. I went there, he wasn't there. And it's true, because he blitzed, and he wasn't supposed to blitz. But then they looked at me and said, then him now. And this is what it meant. He always described him now. Capital letters, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. Him now. In other words, if what you're looking for isn't there, if you're waiting to block somebody and he doesn't show up, just hit anything. Hit anything that doesn't have the same color shirt that you have on. Just hit it and feel good. Just hit it. Just don't stand there. And hit it. And so, oh, all right. So I stood there and waited for someone to come by and see if I could hit them, and they never showed up. But still, it was him now. And same thing with the gospel. It's sort of him now. What do I do? Him now. Just him now. Just I don't know if God's going to send you a note. Just him now. Whether that's the workplace, whether that's your mailman, the neighbor, the person at the grocery store, whether it's putting a door hanger on their door, inviting somebody to an H2O comedy thing where they know the gospel is going to be given, whether it's getting on your knees and praying for souls to be won, to the outreaches that you know are going on, whatever that is, it's all him now. But what am I saying here? I'm elevating how I look. And where I'm elevating my view. I'm elevating my view from my view of self into the view of the world. I may be somebody sick at home in bed, but I can pray. I can be sick at home in bed and write letters to people. I can be sick at home and have an incredible impact in my community just through my prayer ministry. Him now. I can leave a track on a table. Him now. I can put door hangers out in my neighborhood. Him now. I can invite somebody to church. Him now. I can invite somebody to a comedy show. Him now. I can give finances for missions and to get the gospel into all the world. Him now. It's all him now. But when I take my view off that mirror of self and getting these needs met in my own way or getting away with whatever I want to get away with, and I say, I have a bigger life than that. Tim Kelley, separated to the gospel of God. Put your name in the blank. Separated to the gospel. It puts you in debt. Whatever that means. God, do you want this for my life? You have it. You want to use me in this way, and our gifts and calling are going to be totally different. How God uses us is going to be totally different. Most won't be called to do what I do. Most will be called to go wherever you're at. And that could change throughout your life too. Romans 1:17, for herein is revealed a righteousness of God from faith to faith, as it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hinder the truth in unrighteousness. So what's it saying? Why this gospel? Verse 18, God's wrath is directed towards all unrighteousness. And my friends, unrighteousness, that is all man can produce without the Holy Spirit. God's righteousness is the only standard and is unalterable standard. God doesn't want a little righteousness, mostly righteousness. He wants perfect righteousness. He looks at the human race and says, God, by the way, guys, you got to be perfect. You can't sin once. You can't have one fault. You can't tell one lie. You can't do one thing wrong. You can't lead one person astray. And by the way, you can't even have a bad attitude. And if you have any of those things, guess where you're going? That sounds a little facetious and it's a little bit funny, and I don't mean it that way because it's pretty serious. The point is this, Paul was getting at. We have no hope. There is no hope outside of that. That's our message. That's what we're indebted to. There is no hope outside of that. That message says that man who thinks wrong, acts wrong, performs wrong, who has insecurities and fears, who has lack of faith in his life, that man or that woman who names the name of Jesus Christ stands in perfect righteousness, fully accepted to God Almighty. Not because he is, not because he's righteous, not because he performs, because he has been given the righteousness of God's own Son, Jesus Christ, who died on the cross as the only perfect man. 2 Corinthians 5, verse 21, for he has made him to be sin for us who knew no sin, that's Jesus, who knew no sin, that he might be made righteousness, the righteousness of God in him. It is the gospel that justifies the sinner, it is the gospel that sanctifies the sinner, and it's the gospel that glorifies the sinner. It does all of it. is the gospel of sufficiency. It can save. The gospel secures. The gospel empowers. The gospel heals. The gospel restores. The gospel forgives. The gospel promotes. The gospel is inclusive to all people, all nations, all races, all languages, to the weak, to the strong, to the famous and the insignificant. The gospel goes to everybody. We're indebted to all of them as God's people. We want to reach to down and out. We want to reach the up and out. They're all out. We want to reach the executive. We want to reach the homeless. They're loved the same way by God. We want to reach people in faraway lands that don't speak our language. We want to reach people in the cubicle next to me in the office. It doesn't much matter. We're separated unto the gospel of God. This is his message that he has given us to carry. G. Campbell Morgan said this, quick quote. He said, "The gospel is for all men, and for all men it is committed to us." Great statement. The gospel is for all men, and for all men it is committed to us. We're here. There's a big thing in Boston sports years ago when Larry Bird and all the famous Celtics stopped playing basketball, and the Celtics team stunk for a long time, just really bad. And the owner finally said, "Look it," he said to the Boston fans who were whining and complaining. Not that I would ever know a Boston fan to do that, but it was they said, "Look it, Larry Bird isn't walking through that door." And he was talking about Larry Bird ain't coming back. His career is over. This is your team. This is who we are playing. This is who's on the court. The Apostle Paul did his time. The other disciples, they did their time. D.L. Moody did his time, and Charles Spurgeon did his time, and Billy Graham is still at it. Probably won't be too much long before we can say he did his time. The church has been full of people who have shed their blood, lots of blood, for the sake of this gospel. There's been preachers and evangelists and missionaries. Most will never know their name, will never know when they were born, will never know when they died, and will never see the ramifications and the scope of their fruit. They will have escaped the notice of man, but never the notice of heaven. Now it's our time. You're given 75 years or so, give or take, or to when God calls you home. Now it's our time. It's our time to be separated unto the gospel. To get rid of that worldview, to buck the trend of society which we saw at the beginning of the message and say, no, I'm not changing my vocabulary. I'm called to be a special messenger of Jesus Christ. I am separated unto the gospel. Will I be a housewife and a wife? Yeah. Will I be a husband? Uh-huh. Will I be a normal person in society? Yeah, I'm just very normal, average schmuck. But I understand that I have this calling, that I have this treasure in an earthen vessel that has put me in debt to the barbarian and the Greek and the Jew and the St. Pedians. It's put me in debt. This is our message. God gave me this gospel. He wrote his name on my soul. I am his. I'm separated to it. That's Diane's phone. Jason told her to shut it off before she came in, too. I'm sorry, Diane, to embarrass you like that, but you ruined the whole message there. Just, something like that. Not Diane down here, Diane back there. Yeah, just to make sure you know. Because she was getting a little nervous down here. That might have been her, a different Diane. She's in the back. I've been given this gospel, my friend. I want to just close with that. I mean, funny as it was, but understand me. I don't want to heap. I understand life. I do. I counsel lots of people as part of my ministry. and I understand real life and real pressure and real situations and real pain and things that happen when you're young and the impact they have today. I understand financial constraints and overworked minds and busy lifestyles that you can't ever seem to rein in and get control of. I do. I'm not minimizing the human experience. But when you look in the mirror tomorrow, just elevate your eyes a little bit. Lift up your eyes and see in Luke 4 that the field is white. The harvest is ready. This isn't about my stuff. This is about this entrustment. This has been given to me, this gospel of God. How do I get that into my world? Jesus, thank you for these words, and we'll just close with this. Dear Jesus, we just appreciate your presence today. God, I don't know why you entrusted us with such a glorious message. I really don't. I wouldn't entrust us with it, but you did. But you did. But you did. You trust us. So, Father, I take that trust seriously. With every head bowed and every eye closed, it all starts here. It all starts with a personal day of salvation where you ask Jesus Christ to be your Savior in the quiet place of your heart. If you've never asked Christ